Horrible Harry and the Ant Invasion by Suzy Kline. Horrible Harry and the Ant Invasion. When Harry and I walked into room 2B, we couldn't believe our eyes. "Look at that!" I said. "Wow. What is it, Doug?" Harry asked me. "It's an ant city." "Ants." Harry grinned. Then he rubbed his hands together. Harry loves anything that crawls, slithers, or slides. He loves slimy things, hairy things, and creepy things. Harry loves anything horrible. "The ants haven't arrived yet," Miss Mackle said. "But they should come any day now in the mail." "The mail?" Sydney made a face. There's going to be ants in Miss Mackle's mailbox." Harry flashed his white teeth. "Neato," he said. "Are we going to have an ant monitor?" Miss Mackle looked at the list of jobs on the monitor chart. "We're going to need one. Would you be interested, Harry?" Harry smiled so wide his silver fillings showed in the back. Miss Mackle printed Harry's name next to Ant Monitor. 1 week later, when the class was lined up in the hall by the office, Miss Mackle checked her mailbox. She found a small manila envelope in it. When she opened it up, she pulled out a plastic vial. There were a lot of black, hairy things moving around in it. "The ants," the class shouted. The school secretary, Mrs. Foxworth, poked her head around the corner. "Ants," she replied. "We're going to observe their behavior," Miss Mackle said. Mrs. Foxworth tried to smile, but she was shaking so much the pencil that was sitting on her ear dropped to the floor. Harry picked it up and handed it to her. "Are you afraid of ants?" Mrs. Foxworth ran back to her typewriter. Harry grinned. "She's afraid of ants." "Well," Miss Mackle said, "the directions on the small package say to put the vial in a refrigerator for 10 minutes so the ants will go to sleep. It's easier to put sleeping ants in the ant city." Harry stepped forward. "I'm the ant monitor. I'll take it to the teacher's refrigerator for you." Miss Mackle raised her eyebrows. "Can I pick an assistant?" Harry asked. Miss Mackle nodded as she looked at the waving hands. "I pick Doug," Harry said. I beamed. Miss Mackle looked relieved. We walked down the hall to the teacher's room with the vial of ants. When we opened the refrigerator, we looked for a place to set the vial. "Gee," I said, "there's so much diet soda in here, it's hard to find room." Harry finally set the vial on top of a container of banana yogurt. Then we walked back down the hall. Mrs. Foxworth was coming toward us. "Hello, boys," she said in a cheery voice. "Taking your morning break?" Harry asked. Mrs. Foxworth nodded. "Thought I would have a little banana yogurt." Harry and I stopped. We looked at each other. Mrs. Foxworth closed the teacher's room door. Then we heard it. A shrill scream. Harry and I walked back to room 2B laughing. 10 minutes later, Miss Mackle brought the vial of ants back to the classroom. Everyone gathered around the science table. "I think I should do this, boys and girls," Miss Mackle said. "Some ants bite. I don't want any of you to touch one. Is that clear?" Everyone nodded their heads. Miss Mackle took the roof off an ant house. Then she took the cap off the vial. We all watched her pour the ants into the small opening. "Their bodies look like raisins," Ida said. "That's the way they sleep, Ida, all rolled up," Miss Mackle replied. Sydney groaned. "They're gross." The teacher looked at Sydney. We are scientists. We are observing ant behavior. Someday, someone in room 2B may be a great scientist and make great discoveries in a lab. Harry and I pointed at each other. We're planning to be great scientists. Someday. Just as Miss Mackle finished pouring the sleeping ants into the hole, the ants at the bottom of the vial started to wake up. Goodness! Miss Mackle exclaimed. Sydney screamed when 3 ants crawled out of the vial onto the science table. Miss Mackle stood up. No one move or touch anything. I will get the ants. One is on the floor. Mary called. Miss Mackle crawled after it. She put a pencil in front of the runaway ant. It crawled up the eraser. Miss Mackle popped the ant into the opening of the ant house, then put the roof back on. 2 ants are missing, she said. Her hair was in her eyes and one of her high heels was off. They're going to get us. Sydney shouted. Sydney, Miss Mackle said with her teeth clenched, we must remain calm. Harry stood in front of the teacher. As your ant monitor, I will find the missing ants. And then he gave her a salute. Just don't touch the ants. Miss Mackle insisted. Harry took out his lunch box. He unwrapped his sandwich and scraped some peanut butter onto his finger. Then he put his finger under the science table and waited. Miss Mackle put her shoe back on and pushed her hair out of her face. I think everyone should return to their desks now. I found them! Harry shouted from under the table. Everyone bent down and looked. Including Miss Mackle. There were the 2 runaway ants on Harry's finger. Miss Mackle grabbed her pencil and quickly scraped them off and then dropped them into the opening of the ant city. Harry flashed a big smile. I told you I'd find them. Miss Mackle frowned. I told you not to touch the ants. Look at your finger. Everyone did. There were 2 red marks. He got bit. Mary exclaimed. I think you should go to the nurse, Miss Mackle said. And when you come back you'll see another name on the monitor chart next to Ant Monitor. Harry put his head down as he walked to the nurse's office. The next morning, Harry was really quiet. He didn't join our conversation about ants at the science table. They bury their own dead, I said. They bury their own food, Mary said. Sydney replied. Look, those ants are kissing. Miss Mackle walked over to our table. Ants pass food by kissing. Some 14 times they send messages that way. Sydney fell off his chair and rolled over on the floor laughing. You may return to your seat, Sydney. Ida is about to feed the ants, and I want only serious scientists to watch. Sydney frowned as he walked back to his chair. Harry frowned as he watched Ida doing his job. Ida filled an eyedropper from a bowl of sugar water. Then, when the teacher removed the roof, Ida squeezed the eyedropper 3 times into the ant house. I'll get it back, Harry whispered to me. Get what back? My ant monitor job. I looked at Harry. I could tell he was making plans. How? All I have to do is get on the teacher's good side. Then I can ask her for another chance. Just then Harry tipped back on his chair and his baseball cards came tumbling out of his pocket. Miss Mackle put her hands on her hips. Harry, put those things away. Baseball is a distraction in the classroom. Harry got down on his knees and picked up his baseball cards. I don't want any more antics from you today, Harry, Miss Mackle said. Antics? Harry repeated. That's an ant word. Miss Mackle smiled. Yes, it is. We have lots of ant words in our language. Maybe we should think of some. Harry clapped his hands. I thought. Harry might just pull it off. I'll start, Miss Mackle said. Antifreeze, I had to put some in my car this morning. Antarctica and Atlantic, Mary said, looking at the globe. Good, any others? The teacher asked. Antipasto, Mr. Cardini, the principal, said as he showed up at the door. Everyone laughed. My mother makes the best antipasto in the world. Salami, cheese, black olives, Just stopped in to visit the ants, he said, sitting down at the science table. Miss Mackle continued the lesson. Elephant and panther, I said, thinking about animals in the zoo. Harry held up Jack and the beanstalk. Giant! Miss Mackle wrote the new words on the board. Fancy, Ida said. Nice try, but that doesn't have a T in it, Miss Mackle said. Ranch? Sydney asked. That is a CH word. Our class seemed to be stuck. Then Mr. Cardini saw two ants kiss ing and he stood up. I've got one romantic. Everyone groaned as he waltzed out of the room. I've got the best ant word, Harry said. Then he pointed to the December calendar. Santa! Everyone cheered and clapped. Then Harry stood up like he had the biggest idea in the world. Why don't we draw pictures of ants carrying these words? We could make them go up the stairway and invade the second floor. Invasions, I thought. Harry loved them.